Major support for these broadcasts is provided by New York Community Bank, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Chelsea Lighting, Capital One Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance, Genova Burns, Gian Tomasi and Webster, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, the Wickoff Group, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, M&T Bank. Additional support is provided by Ackman Ziff Real Estate Group, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Briarwood Organization, Bruce Mosler, C.B. Richard Ellis, Colliers International New York, LLC, Cushman & Wakefield, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, DDG Partners, Friedman LLP, Accountants and Advisors, Flushing Bank, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Centurion Holdings, Madison Realty Capital, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Certified Public Accountants and Business Advisors, Massey Knackle Realty Services, New Banks, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Sterling and Sterling, SJP Properties, Stonehenge Partners, and these friends.
So how does a kid from Limerick, Ireland, end up as the president and CEO of a little healthcare system, a baby healthcare system? You know, second largest healthcare nonprofit secular healthcare system in the nation. You know, 45,000 employees, 16 hospitals, revenues of $7 billion. That's my guest today. That's Mike Dowling. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
So let's talk a little bit about Michael Dowling. You were telling me, let's talk about your mother and father. How'd they meet originally?
I grew up in Limerick, which is in the southwest of Ireland. And my father worked in what was known as the council, which is the entity that fixed roads and everything. And he was working in a certain part of the county at one point, where he used to have to cycle, you know,
yeah, you had mentioned
numerous miles.
like
There was
5 miles or something.
Oh yeah, he cycled like 20, 30 miles on a bicycle. There were no cars or anything this way back. And he apparently one day met my mother on the street. And one thing, you know, they never talked an awful lot about this. And they finally got together and they got married. And they lived in that part of Limerick, East Limerick, for a number of years. I was actually born.
Now, you were born in a very interesting place. You were born by a midwife?
Yes, I wasn't born in a hospital.
Wasn't a hospital?
No.
So it was a midwife, and was it in that small little thatched roof?
No, not in that house. In the house that my mother's parents grew up in. I was born in a small room on the side. And the room is still there, although it has expanded a little bit. But up until a number of years ago, the room was there. And every time I went back, they would always take me and say, I remember that's where you were born, right there. And then after a couple of years, my parents moved to the western part of the county.
Now, you were the oldest of 5 siblings,
yes,
right?
Yes, yes.
So they moved to the other
Yes.
county, and then you lived in this thatch roof,
We lived
mud
in
floors?
We lived in a home that had 3 rooms. I've actually built a model of it at home. I have it in my house. Years ago, I decided to build it as I remember it because it eventually fell down on us. We were in it.
You got to tell me that.
Yeah, so it had 3 rooms, one small room, a little larger room in the middle, and another small room on the side. The room in the middle was basically where everybody ate, cooked, hung out. It had a big open fireplace with a bellows. You know, you know, there was no electrical stuff, right? There was no electricity in the house. There was no hot running water.
You said there was no hot running water?
No hot water,
no bathroom?
no bathrooms, no heat, nothing like that. The walls were mud. They were about that thick. The roof was thatch, and the floor was mud. Hardened mud, you actually, it hardens after a while, so you didn't even realize it was mud. Every time it rained very, very hard, the water came through the back wall, and you'd get up in the morning in bad weather and you'd sweep the rain
But
out
tell
the
me the
front.
story of how the house collapsed one time.
We were I probably was 10 or 11, and in a bad storm. One night, there were 3 of us sleeping in this one bed. 2 slept one way, the other one slept the other way. And all of a sudden, the whole inside thing just collapsed on top of us. Thatch and mud and, wood and everything. And, we fixed it up.
You rebuilt it.
Rebuilt that part of it. And then years later, we moved out of it. And we had built another house for ourselves, which I had helped on because I had been over here working at the time. And that house eventually completely collapsed. The old one, after we had left it, completely collapsed. It had been around, I might guess it was around from the 1850s. It's one of those homes that you don't find anymore, unless they build them for American tourists who pay an awful lot of money to live in them because it's kind of romantic. I didn't find it that romantic when I lived in it.
Now,
But it wasn't, but I never thought it was bad. I mean, I never really thought I was deprived being in that place because I didn't know any better.
Now, your father's working on the roads.
Right.
Now, the interesting situation was your mother, you said to me, was deaf at the age of 6.
About the age of 6, my mother became totally deaf. And as best as we can tell, she took medication for an illness that had the effect of creating deafness. And I always forget the name of the drug. I should remember it. But it's now available, but back then it was in its infancy, of course, back in when was this? In the
But she could
40s?
talk, you said.
Yes, she could talk very well because she learned how to speak before she lost her hearing. But she was always very deaf. She would lip read. She couldn't do signage or anything. And to get her attention, you could scream. If she wasn't looking at you, you could shout, but she wouldn't hear it. And the only way you got her attention, you hit the floor like this, or you did this. And vibrations got her attention, and she would turn around. But she never, I have to say, ever would acknowledge or admit that she had a disability, and never used it as a crutch.
Now, but your mother was voracious reader. She loved reading, which you took on. And your mother and you would read Shakespeare by a candle, right?
Yes, she was a wonderful person in that she was unbelievably bright. She was absolutely a wonderful human being overall. But she loved to read and study. And when we didn't have much else, we always had books in the house, including Shakespeare. So I grew up reading all the time.
But one of her favorites, and yours, was Zane Grey.
Zane Grey, yes. I read a lot of Zane Grey. She liked them, and I liked Zane Grey because, and I still think of this today, I was fascinated by his ability to write a story so you could almost visualize the landscape because of the way he wrote it. And even to this day, if I'm ever giving a talk or something, I like to describe something so that the person listening can actually visualize it. And I thought I knew, he wrote an awful lot about the Midwestern United States, the cowboy world. And I thought I had been to the Midwestern part of the United States. I thought I could visualize the Great Plains because of the way he wrote. It was a fascinating thing. I was always fascinated by that, how you can turn words into a visual. I thought it was just great.
Now, growing up, you did farming, you said, milking cows and pigs.
Yeah, we did not have a farm ourselves, but we grew up in a farming area. It was way out in the country, and everybody around us was farm. And so I was milking cows at the age of 6, 7, 8. Milk cows for the neighbors every morning and every night. You'd kill the pigs, you'd make the pork, you'd hang it up in our house, you'd always have a pig hanging from the ceiling. You'd salt it, and you'd hang it up, and then when you needed to eat it, you'd get it down, and you'd cut a piece off, and you'd cook it. And I always, back then I didn't realize that all of that fat was not necessarily good for you, but that's what people ate. So yes, I worked in the farms a long time. Yes.
But you loved education. You were,
I was fascinated with learning. I always dreamed of going to college. the only person I ever knew that went to college was my teacher in high school. And but I always dreamed of going to college. I always kind of imagined what college would be like. And I always believed I would get there. My mother was one who always said, you know, and I remember this, not in these exact words, but she always said, don't ever let your circumstance impede your potential. Always go for it. My father, on the other hand, was much more laid back about all of this. My father wanted me to become a policeman or a postal man because, you know, he thought, well, it was a stable job, it would have a pension, you know, it didn't rock the boat. My mother was always one, and I think this is the reason that she had books around all the time, because it opened up your mind. We had no television, remember. So, you know, the world I grew up in was very small. The world I knew back then was the world only as far as I could walk or bicycle. The rest of the world, I knew it was out there because I read about it.
No, but you said to me you bicycled a far distance to school, didn't you?
Yeah, went to high school, was over 5.5 miles, and we'd bicycle or walk.
Now, in order for you to get to the college, you had to excel, and you were telling me something about the silver and the gold.
Well, it was, to get into college back then in Ireland was much more about whether you could pay for it or not. People with a lot of money were able to get to college. There weren't that many scholarships. The rules changed when I was in high school, where it became much more evident that the people made it more evident that what college should be all about should be, you know, your talent. And then they were talking an awful lot about bringing in some scholarship help. I never benefited from any scholarship help because it didn't exist. But when you went to do your final exams in high school, you had to score so high. You had to get honors in so many subjects. So I took, let's say, 7 subjects. You had to get honors in X number, and you had to be in the top percentiles in Ireland at the time to be able to make the cut to get into college. And I remember I went to England to work, and I remember when I was in England, I got my results. And I'll never forget, I get the envelope, and, you know, like I put it on I was afraid to open it because it was either going to give me an opportunity to think about college, or it was going to.
It was like me for the draft board.
Yeah, it was like, shall I open it? You know, you cut the corner. You think it's going to talk to you when you open the little corner. And I made the cut to go into college. Now, of course, the question was, my mother was enthusiastic. I came back from England, and then the issue was, well, how am I going to afford this?
Now, but originally when you went to England, you were working, you said to me, in a steel factory.
Steel factory.
That used to make the trains, right?
Made parts for trains, yes. It was a big steel factory in a place called Crawley, south of London. And so now I worked there, and it helped. I was able to make some money, put a little bit of money aside, but primarily also help my parents. I mean, it's very interesting. A lot of my focus was back then was how to help my family. And I'm still very family focused.
Right, and that's how you then came to America for a combination of helping your parents and also education. So now you come here, you have no relatives. You had one relative.
I had one relative in New Rochelle.
In Pelham, you said. I think it was Pelham.
Pelham, New Rochelle area, I think. Yeah, he actually lived in New Rochelle, but that was his area.
So you
Pelham.
end up here. I think it was a great story. And you thought you were living in New York, and you were in Jersey City?
Yeah, I got a place to stay, and it just took me a long time to get there. And I'm at work one day, and I'm explaining. Somebody's asked me, "So where do you live?" You know, once I get to know some people, and it was down on the docks on the west side, and the guy said, "Where do you live?" And I says, "Well, I'm not sure, but let me tell you how I get there." So I explained how I got there, and then he looks at me strangely. He says, "You can't be living in New York. You're taking a bus and a tunnel, etc., and you're going west." I was actually living in Jersey City. And after that, I changed, of course, and I came back.
Now, how did you get the job at Circle-Line? Because when you came here, you were working like 17, 18 hours a day. But
Yes.
one of your lead job was working at Circle-LIJ.
With Circle-LIJ, I worked on the engine rooms, under the ground. It's hot. And I rambled around the city looking for work.
What were you doing at the engine rooms? I mean,
You come in the morning, you start up the engines, you clean the engines, and in fact, when the captain is up top, when he changes the direction going forward or going back, or changes the direction of the movement of the vehicle, it always, the bells were downstairs. If he said we needed to go forward or go in reverse, I was the one on the bottom that had to make the change, otherwise it wouldn't go. He didn't control it from up there. It was controlled from the engine room.
so it was Circle-LIJ during the day,
Yeah.
and at night you had a couple of other interesting
I used to work. I worked as a school I cleaned out schools in Queens. And I worked in bars. I cleaned out bars. I had a bunch of bars in Astoria, where at 4 o'clock in the morning I'd go to the bar and
then you
sweep
go to
the floors.
And then you go to Circle-LIJ.
Yeah, and I worked a lot of hours.
Now, but you were saying to me you made a good amount of money
Yes.
that you were able to go then, because you did this on a part-time basis, and then you go back to London.
Back to Ireland.
Ireland, right.
For 3 years, I worked here right close to 6 months. I worked every single hour. I don't think I ever took a day off. No tourism stuff, none of that. And that wasn't of interest of mine. And when I was able to go back, I was able to pay my way through college and help my parents. I always sent money to my parents all the time. And I was able to pay my tuition. And so
So you
for me,
graduate from where?
I graduated from the University College in Cork.
Port.
And and during that period of time, I did a bachelor's degree, and then I did a higher diploma in education, because when I went to college, the only thing I thought you could become was a teacher.
Now, what's interesting is, when did you get into hurling?
Oh, I started hurling when I was, in Ireland. The day you're born, when you can start to walk in Ireland, you start hurling. You have the first gift that kids got back then was a little hurley, the stick. And that was what kids wanted. And so everybody played.
Now, but you did that in college also, right?
Oh yeah, I played for college.
You were a good.
I was a very good hurler. Yeah, I played for college. I played for Limerick for the county, and I played at the top level in Ireland. Yeah, it's a pretty physical sport, and it's played over here in the Bronx, but not that much by other people. It's not played at all by people who are not Irish, because the lawyers wouldn't probably let you. It's a little bit too dangerous.
So now you finish college, and what happens? You come back here, right?
Oh, then I'm back here, and I continue working down
At Circle-LIJ.
Down Circle-LIJ, and I worked in construction. I worked as a plumber.
What aspects of construction were you in?
Physical labor, hammer and saws and shovels and basic anything.
You see, it's perfect for all the new hospitals. You can go in there and check out.
Well, I know a little bit about it.
That's right. You know the PVC,
Oh yeah, I can do a lot of stuff myself. Even since over the last 10 or 20 years, I've done a lot of work in my own home. I know the stuff pretty well, and in fact, my father, when I was very, very young, my father was very good with carpentry and stuff like that. So he always had us do things, and he was a perfectionist. If you didn't do it right, he'd have you knock the whole thing down and start all over again.
Now, you also mentioned to me that your father had to retire because he had terrible rheumatoid arthritis at 32.
Yeah, my father got very ill with rheumatoid arthritis at the age of about 42, and became essentially disabled from then on. He was not able to work. He was terribly disabled with it. And he was a very hard-working individual. The climate in Ireland didn't help. There wasn't the medication there is today. He didn't really take care of himself. The house was always wet, because we didn't have heater. The walls always seeped. If you went to bed at night and you leaned against the wall, you get up in the morning, you're all wet.
Yeah.
So he eventually died at, he was 60 when he died.
So how do you make the transition from construction, working, cleaning, still cleaning? You were in Astoria at this time, right?
Yeah.
Living in Astoria.
Yeah.
Then you went to graduate school.
I went to Fordham.
And
I was...
what were you going for at Fordham?
I was fascinated with the whole social welfare area, partly, I suppose, because of my background. My father had some, obviously benefited from meager disability benefits. So I was always fascinated by those areas, health, social welfare issues. And so I looked around and looked at a number of schools and ended up going to Fordham University to the Graduate School of Social Service.
In Lincoln Center.
At Lincoln Center. And I went there, got my degree there, but also got very involved in student politics there.
You were head of the student
Yes,
government?
and as I was in Ireland, when I was in college in Ireland, I was very actively involved in student politics as well. I was the vice president for student affairs. I was on the president's council of the university, etc. So I was always involved in a lot of those things. Similarly, when I was at Fordham, I was very much involved.
And then you became a teaching assistant.
Then they asked me to teach an adjunct course at the university at Fordham, which I did. Then they asked me to do a second one, which I did. And then they asked me to come on full time.
And become an assistant?
I was a professor and assistant dean. Eventually, it took a couple of years though. I eventually became an assistant dean for the Lincoln Center campus.
Now, what courses were you teaching at Fordham?
I was teaching mainly social policy courses, welfare policy, health policy, budgets, governmental budgets, and pretty much anything that they wanted. I would try my hand at anything. Before I taught them, I never knew anything much about them. But the one thing about teaching is that you're forced to learn quickly.
Now, besides that, then you get involved with Fordham
Yeah, they had
the extension. You get involved with the
They
program.
had a campus in Tarrytown at Marymount College, and I was asked to. I was teaching there also while I was teaching at Lincoln Center, and I would go up there on Saturday mornings, and then they asked me if I wanted to head up the program there. So I said yes, and I headed up that program for a number of years, and it grew dramatically. It expanded phenomenally.
Now, there was a very interesting one person in your life at Fordham with the United Churches.
Well, when I was at Fordham, as part of your education, you had to do what was known as field work, or you had to do an assignment with a company. And I was assigned to the United Church of Christ, which was obviously a religious organization, but it had a whole social welfare component to it. And there was a guy who headed that, a guy named Hobie Birch. And Hobie Birch was at one point the assistant secretary of HEW, which then it became HHS, and now it's CMS. And he was a fascinating individual and was a wonderful mentor. I would watch the way he did things. I would watch how he spoke. I would watch how he would handle meetings. And I would go to meetings every night, and I would agree to take minutes because I wanted to see how the powers played, the people that I would read about. And I remember sitting at meetings with the head of United Way and Hobie Birch and a lot of others. And I would watch how they did things, and I would take minutes. They'd ask me to take minutes. I never got paid for any of this. But I was fascinated by it all.
And then you decide that the kid from Ireland should go for your PhD, your doctorate, right?
Yes, I entered then my doctorate at Columbia, and I did that for 2 years, more than 2 years. I got passed all my exams, passed my oral examinations, got my dissertation proposal approved, drafted it, all set.
And what happens?
And then a wonderful opportunity occurred. Mario Cuomo had got elected as the governor of the state, and I did not know Mario Cuomo at that point. I had not been involved in the campaign, nothing like that. But I used to do a lot of speaking engagements around the place, and for whatever reason...
What type of speaking engagements were you doing?
Well, it would be on health
social
issues and social welfare issues, yeah, and I'd be on panels. I remember I was on a panel at a conference in a hotel in Rockland when Mario Cuomo spoke and Ed Koch spoke. Remember, Ed was running for governor at the time as well. And it was they were debating the death penalty. I had been on a panel right before that. So that was also fascinating. But anyway, I got a call from the governor's office asking if I would be interested in becoming a part of the Cuomo administration. And I initially, first of all, I was flabbergasted. I just said, I can't believe this. But I was intrigued. And I initially kind of was declined because I didn't know what to do. What I did though, I went to the president of Fordham University up at the Lincoln Center campus, and I asked him.
Finley was this?
Yeah, Dr. Finley. And I asked him, I got to know him a little bit, and I said, what would you recommend? You know, I'm doing okay here. You guys seem to like me, but I have this opportunity. What should I do? And he said, well, I think this is great. I think it's good for the university. What I would suggest is you take a year leave of absence. You go to Albany, you do that role. And the job was to be the Deputy Commissioner of the State Department of Social Services, number 2 person, in charge of all the welfare stuff and everything in the state. And I thought that was interesting. So I said, why
Albany.
I said, well, I don't know Albany. I don't know much about Albany. I hear the weather is cold in Albany, but who cares? It's an opportunity. Let me stick my neck out and do it. And I did it. And, you know, the first couple of months, of course, was like, oh my God, I don't really know what's happening here. Got to learn all of this stuff with the legislature and everything. But I was, you know, I got to enjoy it, and things began to go very well, and people seemed to think I was doing an okay job. And then I came back after the first year, and I asked Fordham, I think I went to the president again, and I said, look, what should I do? And he says, well, take another year. You know, we can come back here, take another year. And I give Fordham a lot of thanks for this. I did that, but then after the second year, I knew this is what I liked. So I worked in the Department of Social Services for a number of years, and we did a lot of interesting stuff. I mean, some very innovative things around, you know, welfare and creating job programs for welfare recipients, and Child Plus was much later. And then there was a reorganization in the governor's office, and I was asked to move up to the governor's office and become the deputy secretary to the governor, in charge of all health and human services. So I had a number of different titles.
Which administration? Was this the second term of Mario?
No, this
is all in the first?
No, this was the second term. You're right. I had been there the whole first term, but I was in the department. And I had met the governor now a number of times during that period. We had done, you know, conferences together and et cetera. So I got to know him. But I was never, not on his inner circle. And then I got this call to come, and I'll never forget the meeting I had with him, and he said to me, so when are you starting? And I said, starting what? He said, so you're going to be working here. And so I did that. I had a number of different titles.
So what we're going to do is we're going to talk more about the last years of the governor and what you did in Albany, and then North Shore-LIJ next week. So
Wonderful.
we'll be back next week to
Thank you
continue on. Just stay.
My pleasure.